Hello, everyone. I am so excited to come and talk to you today from my living room instead of my office. If you recognize the space is a little bit different. I wanted to talk to you today about this book. And it does have a book cover, but who knows where it is. I took it off at some point, and I no longer have that on there. But this book is called Why Good Sex Matters. And the author is Dr. Nan Wise. See if I can get that in there. There you go. Dr. Nan Wise, Why Good Sex Matters. And I really love this book. And I'm going to tell you some of the things that I don't love about the book, but I'm going to tell you why I love this book so much and why I recommend it, and at least why I recommend pieces of it, right? For those of you who don't like to read a lot or who don't like to do really heavy reading or technical reading, science-y reading, I will tell you that it might be a book that's a little bit on the heavy side in parts. Not the whole book, but in parts. Because she is talking about the brain, and she's talking about the science of the brain and how we experience pleasure or how we even maybe lack pleasure. Why we get to this point, she calls this Anhedonia, and what that is the distinct feeling of the lack of being able to experience pleasure, okay? That is what anhedonia is. So you've heard of hedonists and you've heard of hedonism, which is that accepting pleasure and loving pleasure in your life. And this book, it looks at anhedonia, what causes it, and then I love this title, The Pleasure Crisis and the Path to Healthy Hedonism. So she really looks at the brain, looks at it from a science point of view, and says, look, these are the things, the biopsychosocial things that cause us to get in a rut and to not have pleasure. And then also to, here's what we can do, real life, true things, here's what we can do to get back into a place where we can experience pleasure. And we all love and deserve to experience pleasure. And I'm not talking just about sex, I'm talking about in general. This book specifically talks about why sex is good and what sex does for us to help us be able to experience pleasure, not just in the bedroom, but in all aspects of our life. So on page 31, she actually says, and I'm going to read this little piece of the paragraph here for you. I'm just making sure that's on. Okay. I'm going to read this little piece of the paragraph here for you. And this is at the beginning of the book and kind of getting us all set up for everything. She says, my life's work has taught me that the ability to notice, experience, and tolerate the sensations in the body that accompany the thoughts in the mind is critical to empowering wholeness and well-being. We dwell so much in our thoughts, our interpretations of our experiences, our strivings, and our expectations that we register very little of what is actually happening in the body. And when we do attend to our bodies, we often get caught up in the wanting, things to be different, instead of the liking of how they are. When signals from the body are interrupted, the result is that there is no result, no response, no stirring of the imagination, no tingling, no desire. This is the state of anhedonia for many who have lost touch with the capacity for pleasure. And I just find this to be I find it to be fascinating, but I find it to be really true. The conversations that you have, my own life experiences have been, yeah, I'm struggling because I want this. I want something to be different. I'm striving for this thing. I'm caught up in the not being right here and right now and not being in my body or being able to feel my body. And it is absolutely true that once we get into that place where we have harmony again, I don't like the word balance, where we have harmony again with mind and body, then we can really start experiencing the joy and the pleasure. And so something I love about this book is she goes into the why and the how of it. She talks about the brain and she explains different places in the brain and gives a really great analogy to help us understand the different aspects of the brain and how those different parts of the brain work in order to help us process our thoughts, feelings, beliefs, emotions. Speaking of emotions, actually, I wrote on here page 18, so I want to go back and see what she said on page 18 that I really loved. Here we go. She says, pleasure is essential and critical to our emotional, physical, and mental well-being. I think every single one of us can absolutely agree with that, right? Pleasure is essential to our emotional, physical, and mental well-being. We need pleasure in our lives. We need to be able to experience pleasure. And then she goes on and says, our ambivalence about pleasure is most obvious in our conflict with sex. We are deeply into sex, but at the same time deeply at odds with it, often misunderstanding our own urges, needs, and desires. And I find this to be so, so true. You look at what we see on TV, the messages that we get from media, and then the conversations that we're having in schools, the conversations we're having with our friends and families about sex, the shame, fear, and guilt that we have around sex, even though if you look at it on the surface, in the media where sex is everywhere, it seems like we would be a very sex-positive society, yet when it comes down to it, there is so much shame, fear, and guilt. So there's this really difficult, we're definitely not in harmony when it comes to sex because we have so many differing messages from one side and from the other, and then trying to figure out and understand our own needs and our own desires. Okay, so she goes through the 7 emotional systems and really helps you understand each system and how it works for your pleasure and against it. So first we have the seeking system, and that system kind of manages all of the other systems. And then we have, I like these differences here, the protect and then the connect. So the protect or the defensive emotions, they're protective and they are protecting our survival and helping us survive. These are fear, rage, and then panic, grief. And then we have the connect emotions, which are ones that are ensuring our survival. They are driving us to connect with others. And you all know how I feel about connection and how I say that is the real self-care. Like we have all of these things that we can go out and we can purchase and that we can take a bath, we can have the wine, we can have the essential oils and the incense and the clothes that we really love and the makeup and the hair and do all of that. But really what self-care is having that connection with others that is so, so, so very needed in our life. And I love that she talks about that and how these emotions, lust, care, and play ensure our survival by helping us to connect with others. So she goes on throughout the book and she describes these. She gives clear examples of some clients who she has worked with within each of these systems and how those are affecting them. And that gives you the opportunity to connect and say and kind of reflect on yourself and say, yeah, that's something that's going on. That sounds like me. And I love it when authors do that in their books. And so at the beginning of the book, one of the things that she says, this is on page 32, the brain does hold answers to our sexual problems and more than likely explains how we can re-find our way back to pleasure, sexual and otherwise. And of course, the sexual pleasure is so important, but it's how it affects the otherwise because it affects both. How we're experiencing pleasure out of the bedroom can pour into us experiencing pleasure in the bedroom and vice versa. Being able to embrace the sexual side of ourselves and to be able to, quite frankly, use sex as a tool to help us in our well-being, help us be well. Being able to do that also helps us experience pleasure outside of the bedroom in our everyday activities. So she goes on to talk about this amazing stuff. She talks about motivation when we're looking at the seeking system, right? And how the wanting of pleasure and the predictability and where does boredom come in, and how does seeking something interact with panic and grief. And it's really great to look at. And at the same time, I'm going to say that it's really dense because of some of the wording that she uses, like the sentence length, um, the amount of information that she packs into sometimes a small piece can be a little bit overwhelming, and you might have to stop and kind of rewind in your mind and reread it again to get the full understanding of it. And that's why I recommend reading this book with a friend or somebody who you can talk about it with, so that you can kind of chunk that and then have some conversations about it. If you're in the village and you're reading this book, then going in and posting, and they're like, hey, I'm reading the book, I'm at this section, what do you think? And having a conversation about it to break it down, it really helps with that dense quality of the book. And then she goes on to like the third part. Oh, wait. Before I get to that, throughout the book, in each little section that she has these, they're called good sex tips or good sex tools. That's what she calls it, good sex tools. And what I find about these tools, again, like so much of the book, it's not just about sex, it's about pleasure in general. So it can help you understand pleasure and gain a space where you can start experiencing more and more pleasure in your life. And she has those good sex tools throughout the book. So I absolutely love that. And then as she gets into the third part, she kind of compacts a lot of stuff. Like you could see other books coming off of this just from these different different things that she's talking about. Like she's talking about different types of therapy and kind of how she has done that in her own practice and used it in her own practice with some of those good sex tools. And then she also talks about gender and the differences in gender and kind of the science of gender and how it really is a continuum and it's not just this binary male female kind of thing. And I absolutely love that she talks about that in this book. One of the things that I was a little frustrated about, and I talked with Sex Coach U when we had our little book group, I talked with them and I said, this book takes a really heteronormative approach. A lot of the examples that are in the book are male, female, he, she, the wife, this, the husband, this. And that's a little bit frustrating to me, but one of my fellow SCU members, Genevieve, said, made the point of when the book was written and how, things are changing, but they have not yet changed. And so we are finding that, and it's really easy being on this side of the issue and looking at things. I mean, this is a relatively new book, right? So it's come out, but it's come out in a time where people did not necessarily take that approach that is all inclusive. And she's not excluding anybody in any means in this book, but I found that the references were to probably who her typical client is, which is a cisgender heterosexual white female. You can definitely see that in the book if you have that awareness. And I think that if she were to rewrite the book today, right now, I would guess that there would be a little bit of a difference in there and a little bit more inclusivity. I can't say that for sure because I'm not her, but I'm guessing that because she's not purposely excluding anybody. I think it was just how it was written at the time. And then I think we're going to see a big change in how books like this are being written in the future. But still, she goes into gender and she talks about that. And that's a really important thing for us to talk about as well. And another thing that she talks about along those same lines is this masculine versus feminine, and how we have active masculine and active feminine roles, and passive feminine and passive masculine roles. And she spends a couple pages talking about that, which I just find really fascinating. And again, I'm glad that it's something that's addressed, because it's something that we all need to be aware of, and it can help us in our pleasure, it can help us in our sexuality, and it can help us in our overall joy that we experience in life. Um, Finally, towards the end of the book, she says this: actualizing our sexual potential is a practice that can keep us enlivened, sexy, healthy, happy, and connected. Actualizing our sexual potential can keep us turned on to living. And I find that to be, that was page 210, by the way. I find that to be super empowering, um, just looking at that, because we do, when we lose the ability to experience and even desire pleasure in one aspect of our life, that can spill over into other aspects of our life, whether that's sexually or otherwise. And these two things, there is a harmony there that we have to find. I'm thinking the infinity sign, and 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 it's so important to understand that about ourselves, and to be able to look at all of the possibilities and say, I hear people say that this is normal, and I accept that I'm experiencing something that is normal, but it doesn't have to be this way, and it doesn't have to stay this way. So I'm normal in my experience, and I'm normal in seeking an alternative to that experience. And that is why I really, really love this book by Dr. Nan Wise, Why Good Sex Matters.